talk and Q&A with Kalwant Bhopal. We now go to the next part of our EDI report, annual report launch. And I'm delighted that we're joined today by Joan Freeman for our second talk. Joan Freeman is a psychologist who served as a senator since May 2016 upon being nominated by the Taoiseach. She is the founder of the Pieta House suicide prevention charity, an organisation that deals with the intervention of suicide and self-harm. The service has provided free therapy to over 30,000 men, women and children. It's one of the most loved and respected charities in Ireland. Joan has won many national awards for her work for the Irish people and pioneered the international flagship event for Pieta House, Darkness into Light. We're delighted to have Joan with us to speak about mental health and well-being a year into the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Joan. Please do go ahead.
Thank you, Colin, so much. You know, the first thing I have to tell you that this is very much a non-academic presentation, completely different from the last speaker. And the other thing is, I'm not going to be talking about mental health in the pandemic because I'm like you, I'm navigating my way around this. In fact, what I thought I was to talk about was mental health and linking in with equality, diversity and inclusion. So let me just start by saying last month, 15 years ago, Pieta House opened its doors. And Ireland was a really different place then, in so many ways. I mean, for example, I was really impressed with Colin's page-turning report that he shared the screen with. God, I've got two slides. This is the first one, and there's a second one. This one's all about me, and then the second one is about something else. And I was very impressed, of course, with Carlin's shared screen as well. Don't ask me to do that. This is being done by one of the people in the background, Tom. But again, going back to Ireland 15 years ago, we were a different country. As I said, there was very few people had a mobile phone, never mind iPhones. Internet, wow, no way was it in anybody's home. If I want to go on the internet, which was a very, very rare thing, I would have to book an hour in the local library. But Ireland was different also because of attitudes. We had our secrets. And many of those secrets are coming out now, you know, to do with the mother and baby homes and, you know, the sexual abuse that went on over the decades. And of course, we also had our secrets when it came to emotions such as fear and despair. And of course, you never mentioned the word suicide at all, or depression. And thankfully, all of that has changed. But one of the other things that we didn't talk about 15 years ago either was equality, diversity and inclusion. And I suppose, you know, on a bit of a lighter note, the first time I sort of was aware of equality, diversity and inclusion was Pieta House was a few years old at the time. And a colleague of mine came to me, and at this point there was about 50, 60 people working in Pieta, and we were all women, which was great. And not because there wasn't any men there, but it was just great, you know. It was a lovely environment to work in. And then my colleague says, Joan, listen, I just want to tell you, I've taken on somebody, it's a male therapist, and I want you to be very careful in how you speak to him. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, look, you know, we're in different times. We're talking about equality, and don't come out with any of your rubbish like, isn't it lovely to see a good looking fella here working with us? So I suppose that was the first time I was introduced to being aware of equality and diversity and inclusion. So of course, as the years progressed, I became so immersed in mental health. I didn't think of equality or anything like that. But in fact, you know, at one point I was called a one-trick pony because I was so, you know, focused and blinkered about mental health. But what I didn't realize was, in fact, what I was trying to do, you know, provide services, you know, eliminate stigma, you know, educate, was in fact that equality, diversity and inclusion was the core message of what I was trying to do. But when I was asked to speak today, I'm going to be honest. You know, I thought, you know, when we're talking about this, we're talking about particular groups, whether it is people who are my age, or we're talking about people with disabilities or race, you know, different race, different ethnic groups. And so I decided to look up equality, diversity, and inclusion. And a statement came up immediately when I Googled it. And it was a statement from the HSC, and I'm going to read it out to you. So this is the HSC statement on inclusion. The HSC is committed to providing an environment whereby all people, inclusive of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, responsibility for dependence, age, physical and mental disability, civil status, members of the traveling community, and geographic location, where they are all respected and valued. And that was the most resounding explanation for me, because what it meant was this covers, inclusion covers everybody. And by the way, again, just to refer back to my lack of IT skills, and if you see my eyes looking over like that, I have a list here of with big black writing of some bullet points I want to include. So don't be afraid with me looking like that. You know exactly that I haven't lost the plot. I'm just trying to prompt myself. But so the two truths that came out of that statement from the HSC was, number one, inclusion means everyone. And the second truth that came out was that inclusion is the core of positive mental health. So let me explain what I mean by that. So if we flip over the word inclusion and think of the word exclusion, let me give you some sort of examples of this. We heard of course, we heard earlier from Carland that some of the terrible incidences and examples of where exclusion takes place. And what struck me when she was talking was that she kept using the word judge. And that's significant, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But let me give you examples of exclusion. We've heard in recent days about this man, Gordon Elliott, who has been absolutely, whatever he did, is now in the throes and process of being excluded from society, from the people he knows, the people he worked with the organizations that's been involved with him all his life. And then maybe if we think about another example of exclusion, when we think of Maria Bailey, who went through torturous exclusion from her own party, from society, from the public. And when you think of the impact that would have on someone's mental health, but then let's go a little bit nearer to home. My daughter told me there the other week that she's often in town and she would often see and pass homeless people. And she bought this person, she saw this person, bought him a sandwich, you know, in the container, and handed him the sandwich, and he thanked her. He wasn't begging as such, you know, he was just sitting there, and it was obvious that he was homeless. And she gave him the sandwich, and she watched him, take out the sandwich and get the wrapper, and went over and put the wrapper in the bin. And she went to him, she said, well done for putting the wrapper in the bin. And she said, the look on his face, she will never forget for the rest of her life. And she kicked herself all the way home, because what she did was she judged him. And she judged him that the fact that he's homeless, he must be careless, he must be a litter bug. She went back several days, every day for several days after that, to try to find him, to try to apologize. And she never found him. So that's judging, and that's, you know, putting people into boxes. Then another example, a little bit lighthearted. I have a very good friend who I think might be listening in today, Barbara Cantwell. And a few months ago, I was talking to Barbara about Botox. And my husband, by the way, is totally against Botox, but his opinion of it has softened a little bit, because when I get cross with them, I can't arch my eyebrow anymore. But anyway, getting back to Barbara. So we were talking about Botox, and she said, "Joan, why? Why are you getting Botox?" And I said, "Because I want to be included." And what I meant by that was that as I'm getting older, I'm 62, that women in particular, and older women, do become more and more invisible. And whatever you achieved through life is nearly forgotten. It doesn't matter what you achieve or don't achieve, but you lose your visibility. And I thought that if I get Botox, this is going to prolong that aging process. And so behind every sort of reason, you know, whatever it is, there's always mental health. So my mental health at that moment was and is dependent on that people don't think of me as old, and that I'm past it, you know. So we need to be aware of what is behind every action that we might take. And that every single group, that everything that they just see was absolutely true. We are all included. We should be all included when we talk about equality and diversity. So when I think about that, and I think about, you know, the realization that, you know, we have so many issues and problems, and that mental health is core to it, there were two other truths that I realized. And that was, and this is where I go back to what Carland was saying about the word judge. To judge is to exclude. To love is to include. And I don't mean the slobbery, mushy love. And I don't mean the religious love. I'm talking about the love of humanity. So how do we try to make this group, UCD, or an organization, or even society, a more inclusive one? I was looking up your website, the UCD website, and I was absolutely tickled pink when I saw on the EDI page that you have a choir. And the choir meets once a week. I know you're not, I don't know what you're doing now. I think you are doing it on Zoom, all right. But the choir meets once a week. And during that hour, regardless of who you are, what you are, how you are, whether you're a professor or whether you're a student, whatever group you come from, you're all united as one. And the reason why is because you've a shared passion. And of course, that shared passion is singing. And for that hour, you're all coming together. You don't care who the person who's sitting next to you or standing next to you. And it made me realize this is how we need to create an inclusive society. We must share something. We must have a leveler. We must have a common denominator. And to me, that common denominator is mental health, positive mental health. A couple of years ago, I started a company, Freeman Health Group, really to go into organizations to push mental health even further. I mean, when we look at Ireland and we see that we've got services for people who might need mental health advice and support, we have funding, we have, you know, that supports mental health services, but we've left out the most important group of all, and that is the public. So I thought, starting Freeman Health Group, I would go into a company and first of all carry out a mental health audit. Now let me be very clear here. When I go in to carry out a mental health audit, I don't carry a mental health audit with different groups. Like, so this is for people who are over 60, this is for people who may have a disability. The audit is for everybody. And this is coming back to the point that mental health is our common denominator. So the first thing I do is carry out an audit, and that's really basically to see what needs to be improved, what's lacking, etc., etc. The second thing then is that I would then provide training especially training to people who are line managers or team leaders, but to have someone who is aware of signs and symptoms of many mental health issues across the board, and just to be that sort of go-to person. But also that part is also dealing with developing a culture. So let me talk just for a second about culture. So culture means where mental health is very acceptable to talk about. And there's a very well-known email, it became viral, a very well-known email that was sent from a team leader to her team. And she said, this girl suffered from bouts of depression. And she sent an email to her team saying, listen, I'm taking the next couple of days off because of mental health issues. Hopefully I'll be back in a couple of days and we'll be back to square one and we'll get, I'll be buzzing with energy. And her CEO saw the email, and you can imagine that the fear of this was, oh my God, what's the CEO going to say? But the CEO thanked her and said, our health, and when we have sick days, why do we always have to say we're sick? If you have a cold or flu, you take time off. But when you have a mental health issue, you continue working. This is where presenteeism comes into the workforce, where you're present, but you're actually not really there. So then the third part going into an organization is that I focus on individuals, educating individuals. So part of this is providing workshops on a workshop called the 9 boxes. So Tom, if you're listening, Tom, also known as Roll It There Colette, can we see the 9 boxes? So the 9 boxes was founded on a concept that I had when I started Pieta House, that when people came to us who were in distress, we were trying to show them, look at all the different areas in your life that's missing at the moment. And the theory is, if you are involved in all these 9 boxes, you can lead a very contented life. So this was the theory, and it worked very, very well in Pieta House. But I decided on these workshops to do a different slant to them, to have a little bit of a twist to these boxes. So, for example, say it's relationship. Instead of looking at the relationship that's in your life, the partner or lack of partner, or maybe relationship with yourself, ask yourself, what do you like? What do you like in that relationship? But the one I think is probably most telling is there's a box there called Giving Back. And as you probably know, Ireland is one of the most generous nations in the world. We're renowned for always being the ones that will throw in the extra bob and all that sort of thing. And I suppose when we think about giving back, we're talking about obviously making donations, maybe doing the Heartless into Life, donating to Pieta, helping one of your friends because they're moving house, or, helping a loved one because they're going through a bad time, that sort of giving back. And you probably will be quite sure of yourself that you are pretty good at giving back. But it's easy to give when you're giving to someone you love. Or it's easy to donate when you're just throwing a few bob. What about giving back to someone either you don't like, or you're giving back to someone that's not really in your circle? Let me give you an example. So a while ago, a few years ago, I used to live on this road, and there was a neighbour down the road that I thought was an absolute weapon. And I just really, really found her difficult to talk to, etc., etc. And it was around the time that I was doing the 9 boxes, and I thought, practice what you preach. So it was near Christmas, and this particular evening, I went down and left this potted plant with a card in it saying, from your neighbour, Happy Christmas, from your neighbour. And I legged it back home so that I wouldn't be seen. And I did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, she had a bit of a problem with most of the neighbours, and I thought that when she sees that, she won't know which neighbour it is, but she might actually start warming to all the neighbours, because just in case it might be that person or it might be that person. But the other reason was to include her. How awful for her that she must feel that she's not particularly liked in the area. And then the other reason was, you know, when we give and we do something nice, most people know about it. And you get praise for it. But when you do something quietly like that, you don't get praise for it, but you're actually feeding your soul. So that was the whole point. So the workshop, anyways, getting back, sorry, I'm wandering here. So that's getting back to the third part was educating the individual. So the way I feel about all policies, I think they're necessary. It's very important that we're aware of where we're lacking. I'm not talking about UCD, but some policies, for example, in Leinster House, you know, we should have a better ratio of male and female. Boards should have more, you know, better ratio of male and female. And sometimes it becomes like tokenism. So while the policies are crucial because they set the tone, to me, the only way we can make changes and make this an inclusive society is like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. So instead of just you thinking about your mental health, maybe we should be accountable for other people's mental health. And I know that sounds dreadful. I know that sounds onerous, but think about it. We are already accountable or responsible for other people's health. So if somebody dropped, you know, in front of you and had a heart attack, the chances are you would do CPR, you would ring the ambulance, you would take responsibility for that person's event. I also think it's the same with mental health and with inclusion. So do you remember the ad that's on the television that was for the person who was having a stroke? This guy was standing in some sort of arena, some sort of sports arena place, and the next thing he started having a stroke. And the person who was doing the voiceover was telling you the symptoms to look out for. Now, the ad was not addressed to the person who's having the stroke because they can do nothing. It was addressed to the people who were surrounding the person who's having the stroke. It's the same way, you know, we pushed and pushed and pushed all the time the signs of suicide in a person, because the person who's in suicidal distress, they can't do a thing, but you might be able to. You might be able to spot the signs and then get help with that person. And in fact, an interesting point, we had to do this sort of a bit of research on Pieta, and it was discovered that 48% of people who were attending Pieta were male and 52% were female. And we were amazed. We thought this was wonderful because, you know, men tend to have a reputation of not seeking help. So we thought, God, we've made it. We are just the tops. But when we did a little bit more digging, we discovered, in fact, it was the women in their lives that made the appointment for them. But what I'm saying there is, these women were taking responsibility for that person, knowing that they wouldn't look for help themselves. And I'm trying to make that also with you, not only for your own mental health, but take responsibility for the person, including the person. And again, don't do it sort of over the top. You know, that, you know, someone maybe is my age and you're 30 something, you're saying, come on, Joan, down for a cup of coffee, let's have a good time. Do it very, very gently. And because what will happen is you won't get kudos or you won't get thanks or recognition publicly, but you will know you're feeding your own soul. I was going to sort of finish up by saying that, you know, we have so many of these hashtags of, you know, be kind, you know, include, be kind. I was going to say something like that. You know, why don't you, as UCD, start something yourself? But I'm not going to say hashtag be kind, because if you see this hashtag, by the way, or if you think of the word be kind or include, I'm hoping that you will make this as part of your daily habit, that you are going to be inclusive. But if I said to you, okay, let the prompt be, or the reminder be, be kind, include, doesn't sound right. But if you had hashtag feed your soul, that might urge you to do something. So that's me finished. I'm sorry I don't have the slides or the stats or anything like that. I can only talk about my own personal experience and what I see around the country. I just want to thank basically as well, you know, a couple of people. First of all, Alicia, Carlisa, and of course Tom. And Tom, I don't know what your surname is, but thank you for saving me and putting those two slides up for me. Could I thank also Joe Housen for having the intelligence to suggest that I was included today. And thirdly, to Barbara Cantwell, who has put up with my ramblings about Botox. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joan. That was a really powerful linkage between mental health and inclusion, showing us, I think, the importance of us all taking responsibility around mental health, both ourselves and others, and then also challenging us in UCD to work out how to operationalize that kind of way of thinking at an institutional level. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. So I'll start those. I may put those to you. First, you asked, what was your motivation for founding Pieta House?
So I used to have my own private practice, and one of the things, and again, we're talking about 15, 18 years ago, one of the things that I'm so ashamed of is that if someone came to me who was in suicidal distress, I would absolutely run them. I'd get them to go to their GP. I would tell them to go to A&E. I was not going to do anything about it because I was terrified. I was terrified. I mean, how shameful is that when you think about it? But when it came to my own hall door, then I got an insight into what suicide was really about. And really, most of the time, suicide is a reaction to a life event. And if you think about the economic crisis in 2008, 2009, we saw a massive amount of people from farming backgrounds and from construction who all lost their jobs, and it had a domino effect on their relationship at home and everything else. And they were suicidal. They were reacting to a life event. The good news is that we can get people through a suicidal crisis, most people. So that's why I started.
Thank you. You mentioned in your comments you've spotted our UCD community choir, which I think has hundreds of members and has been continuing via Zoom during the pandemic. I want to draw attention to people on the call today that there's a recent blog by Connor Buggy, who's been one of the leading champions within the choir, and Alicia has kindly put up the link to the blog for anyone who wants to read about the community choir in UCD. Another question for you, Joan. How do you stay positive when you hear difficult stories?
Because I've always realized that, and I actually realized from the beginning, that people who are telling me their story are actually educating me. They're teaching me how to cope if this ever happens to me. And you know, that probably seems very, very difficult to understand. But, you know, if someone's gone through, say, abuse, or their child has been abused, or if someone's gone through relationship breakup, you know, they're actually talking out loud about their experience, but they're also coming up with their own solution while we're talking. So I'm being taught how to cope in different situations. Also, I happen to be, you know, a relatively good humored person anyway. And also I'm terribly grateful for my life and for the things in my life. So how could I be in bad form with all the good things in life?
Thanks. And last question, you'll know that universities are closely involved in researching and raising awareness of mental health issues, engaging with NGOs and also with government. I see on Twitter today that we have colleagues in UCD involved in cream pie challenges in large numbers on videos there supporting, you know, with awareness raising and funding. Do you see one thing that the universities could be doing more of around that work supporting the development of mental health understanding and infrastructure is the one challenge you put out to us as to what more we could do?
Well, there's two things, basically. I think at every level in UCD, whether you're the professor or you're the CEO of UCD, that at every level, you should have a natural go-to person. And if you think about it, you know, you spend at least 8 hours of your day, well, before lockdown, 8 hours of your day with your colleagues. And who knows you better than your colleague? They know the minute you walk into your room what sort of form you're in. They know what's going on in your life. They know more about you than your own family, more than likely. And if you have natural go-to people in your vicinity, you know, you don't need to go to a therapist. All you need to do is talk to someone who's nearby. But for that person who is that go-to person to realize they're not a therapist, yeah, they can listen. But if they feel concerned about the person, obviously they link in with the therapist. But I think it's creating an environment and a culture of care. And I think that's a really important thing. The second thing is, as I said earlier, you know, how do you eat an elephant? You take it one bite at a time. If we start individually being responsible for our own mental health and someone else's mental health, and that is just by including, then you are going to create the most beautiful culture in UCD.
Thanks, Joan. In that context, I might give a shout out to our new UCD mental health first aid panel, which I think will be discussed in the next session we have with our panel. An important new initiative that I think would link to some of the ideas you have about making sure there are go-to people and that wider culture of care. Joan, you've been very generous with your ideas and your time and answering questions. We thank you very warmly for joining us today, and we hear the challenges you put to us, and we're reflecting on them, and we'll continue to address them. And thank you for all your work, not only with us but nationally as well. It's very important.